Welcome. You've arrived at Destination on the Left with Nicole Mahoney. Learn from the experience of travel and tourism experts who use collaboration and creativity to attract more visitors, strengthen their marketing programs, and reimagine how their industry does business.
Hello, listeners. This is Nicole Mahoney, host of Destination on the Left. Welcome to this week's episode with another inspirational guest, Carole Stizza. Carole and I are in the same public speaking accountability group. Both of us are working on our craft of sharing our ideas with the world. It is through this lens that I asked Carole to join me on this show. Her big idea is in the power of self-awareness that comes when you ask for positive feedback. That's right, seems counterintuitive to actually ask people to tell you what you are doing right. But that is exactly what Carole suggests, and her rationale for this approach is powerful. A little more about Carole. She is a professionally certified ICF executive coach, a senior HR professional, and has a background in industrial organizational psychology. She has also survived 3 different car accidents, all stopped while turning left, and stage 3 cancer. Resilience, grit, and impatience for life have all been constant companions as she has supported her Air Force husband and moved her family around the U.S. for 26 years, and while she traveled the world. Her ability to help clients navigate change, clarify what is important, and step into better conversations have led her to be a contributing author in 2 books, and she is now releasing her own book called The Ask Framework: Questions that Elevate Your Influence, Performance, and Leadership. Get ready for an insightful conversation, but first, I want to share this important message with you. You may remember that recently we published a 3-part series based on interviews that I conducted while attending the Destinations International Annual Convention in Baltimore, Maryland. I am excited to announce that we recently released an ebook based on those interviews. In Flashes of Brilliance, Lessons Learned, and Future Outlook, 26 tourism leaders' reflections on crisis, you will find tactical and inspirational insights. To get your free copy of this book, go to breaktheicemedia.com/ebook. That's breaktheicemedia.com/ebook and grab your copy today. So Carole, thank you so much for joining us. I'm really excited to have you here. And you and I have known each other and gotten to know each other quite a bit over the past year. And I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to share with us today. So thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, so happy to be here.
So before we dive into the questions, could you tell us a little bit about yourself in your own words? Even though I have the bio and our listeners hear that, I find it adds so much more context to hear you tell your own story.
Oh, so many stories to tell, but I'll try and make it brief. So you're in the travel industry, and I really love that. But I traveled around as well, but not for the same reason. I followed and supported my husband in the military for 26 years. So my background is very, very varied. That's a conundrum there. In the HR industry. So facilitation, training and development, negotiations, mediation. And I found that when I culminated all of that, I was still knowing that there was more work to be done as far as making people happy in the workplace. So I stepped out and got my master's in industrial organizational psychology, specifically in assessments, performance reviews, and the research of how to make people work more happily together. And that allowed me to step straight into HR consulting first, and then specifically executive coaching, because I was able to kind of culminate all my years of watching leadership in the military and seeing the rewards of great leadership, and then also experiencing the fallout from toxic leadership. And right now, with the pandemic almost trying to be behind us, self-leadership and organizational leadership may be our ticket to a better tomorrow. And that has been just a great place to be a partner in.
Yeah, I love that. Did I catch that right? Did you say self-leadership?
Yes. So as an executive coach, we firmly believe that you have the capacity to self-lead, and you need that before you can actually lead. And so it's a 1-2 punch of great leadership.
Yeah, I think that's great. Can you talk a little bit about what it means to have self-leadership or to use self-leadership?
I'll start on the use self-leadership. Um, we we have a love of the DIY world, of trying to figure out what will make us happy, what will make us our best self. And the first step of self leadership is to recognize that you are already positioned to be your best self right now. And if you were told that you have everything you need to be great right now, how would you think about yourself differently? What's the first thing you would start to put out in the world and appreciate by yourself? For those who get stuck when I ask that question, I will step back and do an assessment for their truly organic mental strengths. What makes you you? We're all unique. So let's start to embrace how you uniquely think and get away from the comparison thief and the need to conform in such a way that you lose yourself. So self-leadership, using self-leadership is first adopting what makes you unique, what sets you apart from the next human being, even in the same family, and start to really appreciate that and embrace it so that you know exactly how to put it out in the world. And then we go from there.
So I'm curious in the past year, in the work that you've been doing, asking this question. Like I was just thinking as you were talking, what if we told you you were your best self already? And how would that impact, or how would you feel about yourself right now? Or what would you think about right now? And then I think about right now when you and I are recording this, which is, the end of March 2021, and we're emerging from a pandemic. My state just today announced that adults over the age of 30 can now get the vaccine. So it feels like every day is a little more hopeful. And so I'm curious, how are people applying, or how are you seeing and thinking about people applying this idea of self-leadership as we're emerging from this pandemic?
It's funny you ask that because we're always evolving, like every minute of every day, we're always learning and growing. So it's a little bit hard for people to handle when I say, what if you're already your best self right now? They start to look at me like, well, I'm disappointed. I'm like, really? Why? Why are you disappointed? And it's not that they are truly disappointed. It's that they don't know what to celebrate. And I find that when we dig a little deeper, if they're being pushed to really love who they are right now, they have placed a lot of assumptions where they lack information. And so the need to go out into the world or to connect with their peers or the people they work with, the people who lead them in the role, including the people they may lead as well, they need to now have a framework of how to go ask of what the other people appreciate about the gifts they see in them. It's almost like they need third-party credibility to believe that they have these unique talents and strengths that make them their best self as they are right now. We're always going to evolve. So when I say that, they go, oh, whew, I can keep growing and keep changing. Yes, but you have a choice. But right now in this moment, you are your best self. Let's celebrate. And they don't know how. And that's where we have failed. I think a lot of our society as a whole is pushing people to improve all the time and not taking the time to celebrate what they've gained and who they are in the moment. And now we need proof. So we have to go ask for it.
So how do you help your clients learn how to celebrate and kind of get over that, needing the proof and kind of really trying to realize this idea of self-leadership?
That might be the single biggest challenge in coaching is that you are looking at somebody who is already creative, resourceful, and whole, and yet they're doubting it. So it was a two-pronged approach for me to step into that conversation. One was recognizing how to build in actionable ways that they could start to feel more visible and pay attention to what they were offering the world, and take accountability for writing it down. They could talk about gratitude journals. We talk about professional journals of, just list what you got done today, whatever. The second was, how do you step in professional conversations to go ahead and ask your boss, your supervisor, your peers, what it is that they love about working with you. And so that's where I was really able to take off on a little bit of a research tangent, why we don't ask for this information, why we are so uncomfortable asking. And I think you and I have had conversations before on this, where we started to recognize it's been drilled out of us. We are taught to regurgitate information, not ask for it. And so has been this identifying where the level of discomfort is in people going after information that allows them to have more self-awareness, so that they can start to step into their self-leadership and accelerate their leadership. And so I've been able to help people understand, and I created a framework for how to have those professional conversations, and ended up writing a book about it that's in line with all the other COVID authors of the world, to be published apparently sometime this spring.
A great COVID project.
Great COVID gathering of authors.
So I love that. I want to hear more about the framework, but before we get that far, I just want to back up, because I'm thinking our listeners are going, wait a minute, I'm supposed to ask my boss or like the person who sits at the desk next to me what they think I do well, like, and ask for that. So if I'm following you, where I think we're building to is, we talk about, we need to know how to celebrate. We need to know that we are our best self right now. One way we do that is through third-party credibility. And then what you're saying is, to get the third-party credibility, you're suggesting that I ask my boss.
Yes, apparently. And when I say that, people have the same reaction as you. They're like, wait, because we have some old, outdated thinking that to be humble, to celebrate humility, to let our actions speak louder than our words, that we are supposed to wait for a compliment, that when we do good work, someone will pay attention and tell us. And that's just not happening, especially in the virtual world, when it's out of sight, out of mind. If people are working behind screens, and people working so long beside somebody, they just make assumptions. Well, they must like my work. They don't complain. They must like what I do. They don't complain. I'm like, well, okay, granted, they're not complaining, but is that a standard you want to always strive for? Or they're already bragging about you when you're not in the room. You just don't know to who and what they're saying. So one of the most brilliant pieces of information I was given, I literally got when I was 6 years old. And it took me all this research to look back on that conversation. And this person had come to me, and they had given me the context of the conversation. They had given me one piece of information, the one thing I had done really well. And then they gave me an example of how it made a difference. And I started to think, that conversation was so memorable because it was simple. It had meaning, but I knew exactly what they were talking about. So I started to work with professionals and executives and say, what if you went to one of the people you lead and you gave them clear context? I'd like to talk to you just for 5 minutes and ask you a question about my leadership. It sets the other person up for success. And then they ask for just one thing. Can you tell me the one thing that I do really well that makes you feel I pay attention to you? So they're just asking for one thing, and they framed it so that person's brain can go, oh, I know exactly what they're looking for. And when they do produce that answer, it could be right at the moment. They could ask to think about it for a day or two. The next question is, can you give me an example of the last time you saw me do that? Those 3 little pieces of a conversation are just the perfect ask. It's a framework. You can ask it in different orders. Hey, can you give me an example of the most recent time I did something in my leadership that made you feel really appreciated? But it's just that simple. And we are so untrained in how to ask for anything, that this is a whole new concept for people to wrap their brain around. So when I do tell somebody, yeah, why don't you just go and ask for what they like about your work? And they freeze, like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I have no idea how to do it. I literally get the chance to kind of share this framework, how to do it, and give them an example of how it feels to hear it. So it's a practice game, just like anything we do in leadership, in creating good habits for our own self-leadership. But by wrapping their brain around the fact that you have permission to go ask. And here's why I say it that way. Asking other people for their insights, for what they think, how they see the world, and to share it, even if the information is about you, actually invites them in to have a closer relationship with you. And what person at work doesn't want a boss to ask them and appreciate their insight? So it's almost this concept that asking for information is a gift to bring somebody in, and you learn. So it's kind of taking curiosity into a more strategic, actionable item. Does that help?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you just gave us so many things to think about. Really great tips. I want to make sure that our listeners caught all of those pieces. And I do have a few questions, but
Go for it.
a few questions of my own to ask. But before we get there, in terms of the framework, if I heard you right, it's giving the context. And so when you said it, when you gave us the example, one thing that I do really well, you didn't stop at what I do really well. You then went on to say that makes you feel appreciated, or something very specific. That's a piece of the context?
So yeah, context is letting them know exactly the specific setting. And the reason for that is you set them up for success. You set the conversation up for success. If I were to go out of a meeting and someone said, hey, can you tell me what you liked in that meeting? I could give them 5 reasons. I could give them 10 things I liked, and they're going to not know which one was the most important. So the context, like you mentioned, the specifics of what you're looking for helps the other person answer and more successfully. They feel, okay, whew, I know what they want, instead of guessing. We spend a lot of time guessing with very vague answers. So yes, the context, the specifics, yeah, maybe a more clear way to offer that. Offer the specifics of the conversation, yesterday's meeting, or the marketing PowerPoint in yesterday's meeting. However specific you want to make it will help the other person breathe easier and know exactly what you're looking for.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, because as you were giving us that illustration, I was thinking, yeah, that's a lot easier for me, as the receiver of the question, to conjure up an answer.
Yeah.
I've been in situations where very broad, vague questions are asked, and your mind sometimes just goes blank. I can't even pull one thought, right? But when you give me a very specific context and framework, it's a lot easier for me to pinpoint. And then I go, oh, okay, yeah, I can think very specifically about that. And for me personally, anyway, the answers seem to come quicker.
You just brought up a brilliant point. And I think that's why this approach is landing as well as it is. If I want to ask you a question, I should take the responsibility of controlling the specifics, because if I don't, I could paralyze you. You just said, I've been asked broad questions and I go blank. And I would say, you have the right to clarify that question. But again, we're so untrained in asking to clarify anything, asking questions, period, that you don't know you have permission to say, oh, that was a pretty broad question. Can you give me more specifics? So instead of coaching everybody and asking questions, just the person who wants the information is the best place to start. So if you want to ask a question, it is your responsibility to be as specific as possible, to set the other person up for success, to be able to step into the conversation.
Absolutely. That's great. Okay. So we've got the context and the specifics. And then you said a follow-up question to that could be, or should be, can you give me an example? Is that right?
Before you do the example, you need to ask for just one thing.
Okay.
Right. So if I were to come to you and say, hey, I'd love to grab a second of your time, right? So you ask permission to ask a question, just blindside people. And say, on yesterday's meeting on that PowerPoint in the marketing data, can you tell me the most important piece of information that's going to affect our project, right? You bring it to a point, the most important, the one thing, the favorite, the biggest challenge, the biggest, hurdle, whatever it is that you want to know about, make it a singular thing. Because if you say, give me the top 3 reasons why that information doesn't work, the problem with that is that you're going to give me the top 3 reasons. I'm not going to know which one to pay attention to first. And it allows me to pick the one I like, and it may not be the one that should be paid attention to first. So by asking for the one thing, it's really clear when you say the most important piece of information from that data chart in yesterday's meeting is this. And I'm going to go, oh, okay. Can you give me an example of how that's going to affect us? And now I'm asking you to walk me through how you see this. Walk me through your brain, not mine, and tell me why you think that. And that's really important for a leader to do because everybody thinks differently. It's a way of getting to know your people. It's a way of getting to know what they look at when they look at data. It's a way of really connecting. And by listening to you, you feel heard and valued.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. So this is a wonderful process to work through. And we're talking about, in this example, as the leader asking, maybe a direct report for some feedback, but you're suggesting too, this could work for colleagues or peers.
It it works even for teenagers. It's magical, which I've tried, right? I've tried. It is this amazing type of a conversation that you step into anybody, whether it could be even your leader, it could be a peer, it could be a collaborator, it could be a client, it could be a direct report, and you can use it to deliver information or ask for information. That opportunity to clearly specify what the conversation's about, ask or deliver just one piece of information, and then give an example of how that applies is so appreciated by the receiver. The person who's asked to step into that conversation walks away feeling valued, even if it's your boss, even in direct report. I'll give an example. When I went to a client, I asked them, hey, I would like to spend 2 minutes asking you a question about our last session. That was the specifics. What was the most meaningful thing you remember walking away with? And they told me, I said, can you give me an example of how you applied it? And that just launched into a brilliant conversation about how easy it was or what challenge got in the way. And we were able to then go a little deeper. It doesn't have to go a little deeper if you are just doing something in passing, but it opens the door to stay on topic and go deeper without confusing it with 1,000 other things that happen at work. You can do that to provide good news. You can do it to provide bad news. But when you want to go out and get information about yourself, you want to collect the positives. And this is one of the best conversations to do that with because it's specific. It's setting the other person up for success. So they actually have warm feelings that, oh, I can be successful in this conversation. You ask for one thing that allows them to easily pop up with the most important. And then when you ask them to see it through their eyes, that's so rarely done that people start to go, they really care about what I think. So it becomes a gift, even if you're asking for positive information about you in some way. And so it's very counterintuitive to how we've been raised.
Yeah, absolutely. It is counterintuitive. And so as I'm listening to you, I'm trying to, process in my own mind how I might apply this. And something just caught me when you just said collecting the positives. So back to the self-leadership and why that's important. And that actually stopped me for a minute because I feel like when we do seek out feedback, it's usually because we think we need to improve or grow. And, we might have the tendency to ask the question more about the negative. than about the positive. Um, th- how do I stop myself from doing that?
It is a natural tendency for us to always ask questions based on where we can grow. It's actually neuroscience driven. Our brain focuses on one of two things all the time: where to be accepted and respected, or where to grow. And it scans the universe all the time, every minute of every day, which is why and Facebook and all the algorithms out there that are drawing people into groups are looking for where to belong and where to accept it, who thinks like me, or, hey, I'm bored here. What can I learn today? We're literally looking for that. So when you feel unchallenged or complacent or everything's just going way too smooth, you immediately go, well, where do I need to grow? And you go ask the question, hey, how can I improve? As if there's something wrong with you. And it's just the way it's been kind of ingrained in our societal conversation. Just like when we were trying to learn how to make really good grades in school, we wouldn't go to the teacher and ask what we were doing well because they graded all our papers. We had that proof. We'd say, well, how do we make a better grade? Or how do I do this better? And we just carried that over into work. So now in self-leadership and leadership and trying to collect data on what it is you're doing so well you don't have to change so that you know where to grow next, you're going to have to start asking for it because of the virtual world. So because you have a team, you could go to your team and say, I just want to ask you a question about my leadership. What's one thing that I do that you depend upon, that you really enjoy, that you count on me for my leadership of this team? And can you give me an example of the last time I did it and how you experienced that? That's you collecting. But they don't know you're collecting the good stuff about yourself. They think you're just interested in what they think. So it's not a ruse. You do get to know how they think and start to really appreciate them as individuals. But if you are collecting data of what you're already doing really well, so that the next time you read a new self-help book or see a great YouTube video, well, I'm going to try that, you don't disrupt the cart you already have. And I think that's the thing about leadership that people forget. There's certain things you already do really well that people have come to really depend upon you for. And if you go disrupting the cart, then you've disrupted their stability. And leadership means you need to be self-aware enough to know not to rock the cart and know where to be better next or where to grow next. If you want to, if you're ready to, if your team needs you to, but you're not going to know that unless you ask.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way to kind of turn that, because what you're saying is, collect the positives so that you can figure out where to grow next instead of just going in for, tell me where I need to improve. I'm trying to collect the positives to figure out where I can go next. And I think that's a really great way to kind of frame that and to think about it. And Carole, I'm curious, because we just used this team example. Are these conversations one-on-one, or can they be had like in a meeting setting or in a group setting?
They can be both. One-on-one is going to allow somebody to be a little bit more richer and transparent and honest with their individual information. But as a team, it helps a team to also bond when you ask, I'd like to talk about this team's productivity, or I'd like to talk about my leadership. Whatever it is you want to talk about, you got to be specific and be very clear on the table so everybody knows exactly what you're talking about. Because you want everybody to feel included and not excluded. And then you say, can you share one thing that you depend upon me for in leadership? And everybody thinks differently. So these answers could be all the same. They could be across the board. Don't be shy. I'm just asking for the one most important thing to you. You can do that about the team's productivity. You can do that about the team's engagement. What's the one thing you feel we do really well as a team to stay connected? What's the one thing you feel we do really well in our communication? And the reason that this positive keeps coming up is when we find out the positive first, and this is from the research and appreciative inquiry, when you start having people communicate on the positive first, it actually changes the brain chemistry to relax more and celebrate, even in a microsecond. Yeah, we do this really well. so that when you do have to deal with challenges next, you're more creative and inventive. So bringing this back to the person who's collecting information, the person giving information is now talking about the positive. So if they have to go back to their desk and handle a challenge, they've got a different perspective. It balances out the negative a little bit to introduce positivity or the topic of positivity into the brain at any point of the day. So there's quite a lot of connecting goodness, but you can do one-on-one, you can do a team, and it can be done really brilliantly. And appreciative inquiry is literally the research of how to bring up the positives of a team so that they remind themselves what they do really well, and that they suddenly now can handle the next challenge without disrupting the cart of what they already do well. It's a balancing checkpoint for a lot of people to be able to innovatively solve problems without, ruining what they already have.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I love this idea of how it's introducing positivity and what you call goodness, into the team when you allow them to reflect in that way, or have that kind of a conversation. I'm reminded of an exercise we did at one team meeting. It was like a superpower exercise, and it was written, and then we passed a paper around. You had to say the superpower about each person.
Right.
On this piece of paper. And it just that exercise alone, when they got the feedback from their peers on what their peers saw as their superpower was, well, empowering.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it is that exact same great information that you want to go gather. So it's counterintuitive. You wake up, whatever happened, you stub your toe, you're late for work, spill the coffee. You can see where the layering of just, crappiness has started your day. It's not intuitive, but that is the day to go ask a friend, hey, can you remind me of one of my superpowers that you depend upon when we work together? And can you just remind me of the last time you saw it in action? It's like chicken soup for the soul. You really have to go gather the positive to balance out the negative you're letting come into your life. And it happens. We're humans. We get it. And you can have a bad day. Maybe it's not your doing. But this ability to know how to ask and then develop or create what you want to collect, what you want to ask, and keeping it positive first helps people avoid things like the imposter syndrome, where they're just placing assumptions, where they lack information, comparing themselves to somebody else, to get down on themselves, to start to shrink back from their coworkers because they think themselves less than. The comparison thief is in the room. This is when a leader can go in and remind them, hey, saw you were down today. Just want to give you a reminder of what I really appreciate about your work. Here's the most important thing. I know you deliver all the time, even when you don't know you're doing it. And here's an example last time I saw it. Just wanted you to know. This is where leadership can actually sprinkle goodness and raise morale and keep that cultural awareness of why they're there, giving them back their purpose for why they're there during the day, no matter how bad their day started. And it's going to be something that we need to see more leaders do and incorporate, because if we stay hybrid or virtual, they're literally going to have to reach through the ether to remind people what they do well, especially when they're out of sight. So the self-leadership part of starting to adopt this opportunity to ask about information you need to gather is step one. Step two is then being able to do the same in your leadership and recognize how to teach this and deliver it.
Yeah, I think you just hit on a really important point, especially as, we're rounding the corner for some folks who have been probably remote virtual for over a year. And, several companies, mine included, have decided to remain virtual for the foreseeable future. And so the way we work is changing. So therefore, the way that you lead needs to evolve with it.
Yes. There has been a rise in this emotional, and I think the label for it is feeling invisible in a very visible world. because of the virtual barrier. I mean, we already can wear pajamas bottoms to work, so we're half there. And so this has become a very a passionate project for me. This is why the book came to be, is that if we can help people who are behind a screen reach out and ask what they're doing well, what are they doing to help stay on target, what are they doing to help their teammates, whatever it is, and have a framework with which to feel a little bit more conditioned and safe in asking, they can gather the data when they need it. But as leaders, they also can step in and offer it. It works great to deliver great news, obviously, and collect good news. It also works brilliantly when you have to talk about a hard topic, such as performance, especially in a virtual world where people don't know how well they're being measured. So as a leader who has to maybe deliver some information, they can say, I want to talk to you about performance last week. I'd like to talk about the deliverable on this. And the more specific they can get, the better the conversation will be. And instead of saying, here's the one thing I needed from you and didn't happen, they can actually say, what was your biggest challenge that you ran into when this deadline came up? And they can be curious. This is where curiosity can come into play for them and say, can you give me an example of how you see us getting rid of that challenge so that you can meet the deadline? You're literally asking them, give me some information so I don't judge you so harshly in my head. And then they can come back like, I don't know if you're seeing the challenge the same way I am. And they can have this conversation deeply on this topic without it going, you never and you always. We're trying to avoid the ineffective conversations and help people really know what they're doing well and where to grow with this framework.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic example. And if you can step back, especially as the leader, and ask the question, what a great tool to have, rather than to, come into that difficult conversation with, you missed the deadline. Why did this happen? Right. And why puts them in the defensive probably. And, this seems like a much more collaborative way to work through it.
Yes, because you want somebody to step into the conversation with you. And you're perfectly right. Why makes people defensive? It literally makes them think backwards. And so there's a last component to this framework, that when you want the conversation to go deeper, such as there's a challenge, or you really want to explore how much goodness is in this conversation, instead of asking why, you want to ask what and how questions. So just like your topic, why did you do this? What got in the way? How can we overcome this? What do you see happening in the future when this happens again? How can we avoid this? Those what and how questions allow the other person to truly step in to the conversation and create solutions with you, not in spite of you afterwards, right? It's a different way we have to look at humans at work right now. And it's a big deal as we move forward.
Absolutely. Carole, this has been amazing. And I told you before we hit record that we probably weren't going to get to any of our traditional questions today, which I knew we wouldn't, but I didn't want to, because you have this expertise and I really wanted our audience to learn from you. And this has been just fantastic. So before we say goodbye, could you, share any final words, anything that you didn't get to share yet? Is there anything we haven't covered?
Oh, you and I could probably talk for hours. So,
Yes.
And your audience would probably be like, not sure. So one thing I'd love to offer is, if anybody really likes this topic and wants more of it, I do have a newsletter every month. I do have a website that they can go to and grab the introductory chapter of why I wrote the book on a personal level, if they want to. And just, they can look for me on LinkedIn. I love to continue this conversation. But as somebody who has been a travel agent before in one of our many military assignments, I want them to know how much I appreciate people in the travel industry. You have been thrown a curveball bigger than, well, as equal to restaurants, but more so, because people need to eat, but people don't always need to travel. And it's such a vital element to our world staying connected, that I want them to know that as a coach who hasn't gotten to travel to see my clients, I miss you guys immensely.
We are glad to hear that. Absolutely. We miss you too. That's why every little announcement about a vaccine opening up even broader is just really good news for us. So, Carole, can you share your web address or where they might go to get that chapter or sign up for your newsletter?
Sure. If you go to relevant-insight.com, that is the website. You can sign up for the newsletter there and get the first chapter of the book, or sign up for that book email. And on LinkedIn, it's Carole Stizza, and Carole is spelled with an E on the end, Carole. And Stizza, the great family secret, has Stizza. If you're Italian, in Italy, it is Stizza. But here in the States, it's Stizza. I'm married into it. It's been a fun spelling game ever since. But both those, that website and LinkedIn, are a place to find me.
Fabulous. And we'll have links to both as well on our show notes page. So thank you so much, Carole. And we will definitely stay connected and can't wait till that book comes out.
Me either. I'm in line with all the other COVID people. It's awesome.
Thank you for listening all the way to the end of this week's episode. This gives me a chance to tell you about our weekly ICYMI, in case you missed it, e-newsletter. Each week, along with our podcast episode, we share an article written by one of the Break the Ice Media team members about the travel and tourism industry. Our articles mirror the mix of industry segments and topics similar to this podcast. To join our newsletter, text DOTL to 66866 or visit breaktheicemedia.com/blog.
It's time to hit the road again. Visit destinationontheleft.com during your travels for more podcasts, show notes, and fresh ideas.